We can't approach IDPs as charity cases. We have to look at them as human beings.
The most urgent priority today is to figure out how to break this pattern of protracted displacement.
The idea is not to expand humanitarian assistance to an entire community and make them dependent on humanitarian assistance.
Welcome to State of Africa, where we're focusing on dialogue and transformative action for progress in Africa. I'm Julie Gishuru. Now today we take you to Lagos, Nigeria. What an incredibly energetic city, for a groundbreaking convening on the role of the private sector in addressing the crisis of internally displaced people in Africa. Let's take a look at the numbers. 120 million people are forcibly displaced globally due to conflict, natural disasters, and climate change. 63.3 million of these are internally displaced people. 32 million of them are in Africa. In light of these staggering numbers, the Africa Roundtable on Private Sector Solutions to Internal Displacement, the first ever convening of its kind, brought key stakeholders together to dialogue and explore solutions that can drive scale and drive positive change through economic growth. This was hosted by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees and the African Development Bank. Aladi supported the dialogues in partnership with the MasterCard Foundation. Now, one of the most crucial issues identified was risk perception. Farouk Gumel, Vice Chairman of Tropical General Investments Group, which owns over 100 leading brands in various sectors, shared his views with Jeff Motte about their community-focused approach and his perspective on risk.
We're looking at private sector solutions when it comes to internally displaced communities. Food security, paramount in both times, good and bad. For your investment group going in, was it a case of necessity? The value chain needs it, we need to go into these particular places. Was it CSR that we should do this? As we do business, it's important to do good as well in the communities that you're in. What necessitated that move?
Both, to be honest. We have always been in the food business. Our group has existed for over 40 years now. And Nigeria went through a very aggressive phase of backward integration, where it's talking about import substitution. How do we ensure that at least for the basics we're able to do it ourselves? And that means obviously setting up processing facilities is one thing. So you set up the factory is very important. But what is even more important is to ensure consistent quality supply into that factory. And that is what has pushed us into the rural areas. As a group, we don't own mega farms, we don't own mega plantations. We work with the communities on an outgrower model or on a supply aggregator model, where they go there, they produce the products, and we buy from them. In some instances, we provide them with the agri-inputs, the fertilizers, the seeds, and the agrochemicals, and even at some point, working capital to enable them run their farms properly. And at harvest, we have a guaranteed offtake agreement where we buy from them. In other sides, we also find local aggregators from those communities who are financially stable and strong enough to go and buy these grains from the farmers, and then they sell it to us on a more aggregated, larger volume basis. And so we have been able to aggressively push to build that network of working with those communities, because we rely on them to make sure our factories run. And our factories have to run to ensure that people eat.
Right.
So that is, if you like, the key driver. Now, when you go into your community, you have to be part of that community. It's a corporate responsibility and it's a moral responsibility for you to ensure that you bring value to them above and beyond monetary financial needs. It's important for them to see you as a transacting partner, but it's even more important for them to see you as a progressive partner that is looking out for their best interests. The definition of risk is very loose. People assume that dealing with those communities, whether they're displaced or not, but those communities that are outside the formal sector of our economies is a risky issue. Now, that definition of risk is also subjective. Your home and my home are different. However, when you go to your home, it is home. When I'm going to your home, I ask questions about it because I want to gauge that risk. And it's the same for you as well. So what is important is for us to interact with those people and those communities that call it home. And once you now interact with them, you now understand what is their own definition of risk. Because ultimately, if I'm being established there, for them, the risk I'm seeing as an issue is zero to them. And I think that is where we need to start to extract knowledge. It has to be a two-way process. As you think about going there, the only people that will give you answers to those questions are the people that are already there.
It is illuminating to see a private sector actor and an African revise this perspective on risk that has been quite conservative and ask us, are we rooting ourselves in the realities of our communities when we look at risk? Now, let's hear from Rauf Mazu, the Assistant High Commissioner for Operations at UNHCR, as he also shares more perspective on risk and on opportunity.
How is the UNHCR looking at this? How is it trying to help private sector get into these particular spaces in light of all of this risk?
No, as you said, the word is risk. But there is risk, the word that you can kind of connect with risk is opportunity.
True.
So a number of business actors can sense that there are opportunities in some context, but have difficulties evaluating what the risk is. As was said during the panel, nobody is asking them to go to places where there is a high level of risk. But what we can do, we as UN, as civil society, or the rest, is to help them understand better what the risk is, through them going to some of these places, being present and understanding and going around. Us explaining also some of the context, because some of the humanitarian context are not really well understood by private sector actors, so to explain that. And then bring actors to the table who can help de-risk. On the panel you had a colleague, Olivier Buyoya, from the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group. He's a regional director for West Africa. And he explained that there are instruments, that there are tools to reduce the risk, to first understand what the risk is and then mitigate it, reduce it. You have ways, for instance, that you have organizations which are willing to provide resources to guarantee some of the investment. And that's a way of de-risking. That you planning to start an operation in a context where there are conflicts, it's $1 million, and you may, if there is a problem, lose your entire investment. So some of these organizations come, help you assess the risk, and then give you a guarantee. If something happens, then some of what you've lost will be given back to you. So it's this partnership. So getting people to better see, understand what the risk is through us helping them assess, and then connecting them with institutions which can actually help reduce some of the risk that colleagues from the private sector have difficulties dealing with, financial risk. If you look at the African continent in particular, if you look at displacement, it's difficult to only point at one cause. It's a mix of causes. And so often there is a link also between the different causes. For instance, the impact of climate change. The impact of climate change in some context, in some part of the continent, will be that you will have less water available, and then you can have problems between farmers, herders, because of the limited water that is available. So you may see then that could result in a conflict, and then conflict people would then move. But what happened at the beginning, what was the real initial cause, was a change in the climate patterns. So it's important to see what can be done at each level. In many parts of the continent, and I was in South Sudan a few days ago, lots of floods. But what I hear from the interlocutor is that we need to adapt. We need to understand what the impact of climate change has been in a given context and see what intervention can be put in place to make sure that you address the new context. One of the things that I've heard in South Sudan from government officials is to say, there are parts of the country where suddenly you have more floods. Rice production is possible in places where it was not possible before. Fishing is possible in some places where it wasn't. So it's important to look at the negative impact of climate change, but we have to also look at what it's creating, the environment, the new environment that it's creating, and see how you can adapt to that.
Such rich insights. And these are important perspectives that help reframe our approach to investment in IDP and host communities. Now, we take a look at more private sector perspectives now. Adeline Somda, CEO of Anatrans in Burkina Faso, is empowering women displaced by conflict through agricultural value addition. She had incredible insights to share.
What was your thinking when you decided this would be the business model and the way the company would look at engaging with these communities?
When I came to Anatrans, my vision was to bring in my experience, to restructure the company and give it a fighting chance. So Anatrans is the leading processor of cashew nuts in Burkina Faso. The company has 2,000 employees, and out of the 2,000 employees, 90% of them are women. And we have within these women IDPs, and we also have widows of fallen soldiers. So these women were working with Anatrans for all these years, but we actually never knew that we had IDPs and widows of fallen soldiers working with us. Last year, we started a project to see how we could include IDPs within our business model. So we were discussing it with my HR director, and I was thinking that we're uniquely poised to bring in IDPs because a part of our processing doesn't really require formal training. Like you can train them on the job for a month and then they're operational. So I figured that could be a good opportunity to engage some of the IDPs because the factory is based out of Bobo-Dioulasso and we have a big IDP population there. And it's while we're trying to work on this project that we realized that all along, we've had IDPs and widows of fallen soldiers in our midst, and they've been working with us. But we never really took the effort to actually identify them. So we have to be intentional and we have to be deliberate in our actions. When we say what is the private sector involvement and solutions of the private sector to IDP, one of the panelists said something that stayed with me. He said, we can't approach IDPs as charity cases. We have to look at them as human beings, and it's they have skills. They have something to bring to the plate. Before they were forcibly displaced, these were contributing members of the society. So we have to look at what is it that they can bring into the business, how can they contribute to the profitability of the business. And we have to engage with them on that. But you can't see them as social cases or see them as you are giving them an opportunity or you are helping them. You have to approach them as a population that can bring value. And I've seen that in the factory because once we were very deliberate, we decided that we're going to set 5% of our workforce for IDPs and widows of fallen soldiers. And because of the background they come from, we try to be closer to them because they're coming from a place of trauma. So we want to be closer to them and make sure that first they're integrated within the factory and they don't feel left out. And since we've now identified them and singled them out and we follow them closely, we realize that they are some of our most motivated workforce. They are very motivated because they are very happy to have been given a second chance, and they don't really have a choice. I mean, it's sad, but that's what it is. So they really see it as this is my all, and so they give 100%, and that's what I was sharing with my fellow panelists. For me, I don't see them as this is a social case. I see them as these women are here and they're working hard. And they're working hard on the profitability of Anatrans. So they are full members of the society, and they have to be seen as such. So you have the shelling section. You have to first shell the nuts, and then you peel them, and then you classify them, and then you package. So all of the other sections are completely mechanized. The shelling section is where we still have a big manual workforce, and then the peeling section, even when you do have the full mechanization, there is still a part of peeling where you need to have a human interaction. So we have about 900 ladies working in the manual shelling section of the factory, and we have another 800 working in the peeling, and then about 100 that are working, who are working in the other sections. So the big manual section, the shelling one, is the one where you can train them within a month, and then they become operational. So this is really where we want to bring them in. But then, of course, our plan is not to just keep them there as unskilled labor, because what we're trying to think is long term. We're saying these are internally displaced persons. So our hope for them is that one day they will be able to move back to their communities. And if they move back to their communities and there is not a cashew nut factory, or we don't know what will be the landscape when they move back, how are they going to be able to survive? So the plan was to train them on other things so that when they move back, that they're able to stay autonomous.
Fascinating how important private sector is, and how Africa needs to back private sector actors who are working in these communities. Another entrepreneur, Amal Hassan, identified Africa's potential in the global business process outsourcing BPO industry. She has leveraged technology to tap into this market, and she shared her vision on opportunities and potential with Jeff Motte.
We have very young population that will be able to provide these services. And I said, why not Nigeria? All the parameters are telling me we have the right infrastructure, we have the right people, we can deliver. We just need to have a company that can do that. So I kept trying. So when I failed the first time, I got up, I moved to another city, Kaduna, started all over again, got a new investor. It didn't work out. I moved to Abuja, started all over again until I started the fourth time, and I went live, as God will have it, with an American client with just 10 people. And today we are over 2,000 people, 2,067 to be exact, and 50% women. And we've moved from the traditional BPO offerings that India has been providing to more professional services. So we provide this customer service and sales that traditional BPO is. We've moved to IT, or software development as a service. We take software developers and they work internationally and domestically from US to other destinations. We take lawyers and they work under senior lawyers in the US. We take accountants and they work under accounts departments of companies in the US, UK. So that's really the model. Whatever skill sets, we've moved from a traditional BPO delivery to a partnership model where we look at companies and we partner with them to grow their business. And whatever skill set they require in Africa, we will find the right skill set for them to be delivered from Nigeria, and we are expanding to other African locations as well. As BPO, we cannot exist without technology. Technology is what enables us to be able to serve the international market. Without that, without internet and infrastructure, we won't be able to be sitting in Nigeria and be serving a company in the US. The same thing with IDPs. If we and humanitarian work, if everything is automated, there will be data. If they are brought in through technology and using technology to document them, then we would know exactly what their strength is. We would know exactly each IDP have accountants, have somebody who is a plumber, has an electrician, and has that. When you bring technology into that, it creates visibility. then a business person can come and look at that data and say, in this IDP, I can get 10 plumbers in my, for instance, Gombe Center. Right now we have 4 centers in Nigeria: Abuja, Kaduna, Gombe, and Lagos. So I can say the IDPs within the region of Northeast, they have plumbers, they have electricians, they have people that can speak English. I would take those people from that using, the data that you have on the system. So how do we automate that? Secondly, if we give them the ones that are literate and the ones that can be trained in computer services, it's something that they themselves can learn to use it as a business. They can create graphics. If people in that region want to have invitation cards, they can design, they can do graphics, they can do normal computer services, when you teach them. So technology can really play, there is really a lot of things technology can actually bring. And it will create awareness generally of their condition. There's a lot of talk about, there's a lot of perception about IDPs. So there's a disconnect between public and what IDPs are. Technology, social media, can actually create a lot of awareness. Private sector can be aware of what is happening, the capabilities of the IDPs, how they can come in. They can look and connect the dots and say, I can create a business around this. Fintech can create a lot of role around financial inclusion. When banks are saying we can't give them money, we don't know who they are. That data, that visibility that is there documented on a system can show them they have 1 million people in this location, that we can give loan using the mobile money, and we can see how this money is being spent on their business, and we can see how we can track and de-risk our loan. So technology can play, I'm just mentioning a few, because we can stay here forever, but it can play every role. It can make government visible. If government is doing an initiative, it will be visible if everything is automated and has visibility.
Right.
So that technology is really great. And also, even the people in the IDP camp, exposing them to technology will expose them to a lot. I was born and brought up in northern Nigeria. I was married at a very young age. I had my first daughter in my first year of college. I have 4 kids and a husband. What are the chances of somebody born and brought up, schooled in Kano, northern Nigeria, just waking up one day and say, I'm going to serve the entire world? It's technology. Without it, my eyes, it would never have opened my eyes to the possibilities of what is out there and what I can do.
Robert Piper, Special Advisor to the United Nations Secretary General on Internal Displacement, addressed government and private sector leaders on their role in understanding the perspectives of these communities and in tackling the crisis.
Your mandate, your role, pretty broad, and this is just part of what you're doing. What does the role entail, and how does it have a perfect dovetail to what we're doing in this room?
Well, I'm leading a global effort to reconfigure the way in which we respond to this growing menace of internal displacement. Around the world, there are 76 million people internally displaced, twice as many as 10 years ago, and almost half of them are in Africa. We need to do a lot of things differently. We need to prevent new displacement, but the most urgent priority today is to figure out how to break this pattern of protracted displacement. People seem to get displaced, whether in Borno, whether in Somalia, whether in Colombia. They get displaced one day, and a year passes, 5 years pass, in some cases 10 years pass, and they're still stuck in displacement for this very long period. It's absolutely catastrophic for people in camps, but even in towns that are in limbo for such a long period of time. My job is to figure out how do we break that pattern. My job was to shake the system up, test some ideas, put in place some new instruments, some new policies, encourage governments to step forward and lay out their vision, their plans for these millions of displaced people to get them on what we call solutions pathways. But it all takes time, and that's a frustrating reality, first and foremost for the displaced people themselves. I come a very distant second after them in terms of why this is important. But it takes time. We need to leave rooms and meetings like this with a real sense of urgency, but also a recognition that to move systems, to do things at scale for 3 million Nigerians, 2 million Somalis, etc., we need a bit of time to make sure that we don't just scratch this urge to do something useful by another project here, another project there, that are all valuable. Don't get me wrong, these are all super valuable and they change the lives of 100, 1,000 people. But we've got to move the needle for millions of people, and that requires a kind of whole different mindset.
Scale and sustainability.
Scale and sustainability. And no way we go anywhere without the private sector.
Welcome back to State of Africa. Internally displaced people understand their challenges, and they understand the solutions that will make a true difference for them and for the host communities as well.
Sannan na koya musu yanzu haka a gaskiya ni kaina ina da mata sun kai kusan 100 a karkashi na wanda nake koya musu sana'an hannu wanda in har yau suka yi wannan sana'an ba za su kwana da yunwa ba.
Currently I have about 100 women under me which I am training, which with the handcraft, women cannot even go hungry. Women are really supporting their family with this hand trade.
Sannan kuma ni kaina ya mun amfani wannan jarin da aka bani. Na ma ƴaƴana makaranta yanzu haka ina da ɗana wanda yanzu yana part 2 a University Maiduguri, kuma ina taimaka ma ƴaƴana marayu muna cin abinci da wannan sana'an da na samu.
With this trade that has been supported by the organization, I have supported my family. My children are in school. Currently, I have a child that is in part 2 at the university, and I'm supporting my children in schooling.
Sannan yanzu haka akwai mata ƴan uwana wanda su ma suna son su bi wannan sana'an da nake yi. Amma ni bani da karfin da zan nemi tallafi zare da su allura da me wanda zan ba su ma su koya. In akwai hali ina roƙon UNHCR su kara taimaka ma mata ƴan uwana wanda ba su samu wannan tallafi da don su rike kansu ba, su kara su koma wajajenmu muna nan da yawa irin wanda ba su samu irin wannan tallafin ba ko su ma zai musu amfani ya kare su.
There are other women there in the LGA who need support. I'm advocating with the people that are sitting here that the women need support so that their feet, they will stand up on their feet like me.
Shi ne ni godiya na da kuma shi ne ƙarshen maganar da zan faɗa da kuma a gaskiya mu mata a yau ina kowa ya san halin da muke ciki. Dan Allah dan Annabi akwai wasu mata, akwai iyayen mata wanda basu da ƴaƴa, basu da maza, kuma sannan basu da mai tallafa musu. A gaskiya mu ta gefen wajajenmu muna dan samun wani matsaloli na hanyar kayan abinci da sauransu. Dan Allah dan duba mata kuma dan tallafa musu in akwai hali. Ina gode ma UNHCR da Belu da ta kawo ni cikin mutane. A yau din nan ni ga nan na zo na tsaya a gaban baidin jama'a. A gaskiya na ji daɗi kwarai da gaskiya. Na gode.
I want to really use this opportunity to appreciate UNHCR for bringing me to this great occasion. Also, there are other women there, there are widows, we need support. You know, with the inflation in the country, things have been difficult. I'm soliciting and advocating on behalf of my fellow women down there that they need support, to support me and to be on my feet like me. Thank you very much, and I thank you for the appreciation.
We are all in this, and we have to be to transform Africa. Housing is one of the biggest needs for IDPs. It presents a significant investment opportunity as well for many organizations within the continent and beyond. A study by the International Organization for Migration, IOM, found that internally displaced people with housing are over 3 times more likely to avoid dependence on humanitarian aid, and they are twice as likely to have stable incomes. This is dignity, and achieving this requires collaboration between the private sector and governments. In Nigeria, the government established the Family Homes Fund to provide housing for low-income earners, vulnerable groups, and displaced persons. Special advisor to the managing director of Family Homes Fund, Ahmed Baba, shares insights on how they are tackling Africa's housing crisis.
We established the fact that investments, financing needed for the housing of IDPs requires long-term patient capital. We also established the fact that most of them are no-income earning people. So there's a need for us to critically gather data that is verifiable and that speaks to the true nature of the IDPs. There was also the mention of lack of proper documentation, verifiable information. There was also the need for advocacy to promote information around financing solutions for housing. We also touched on the possibilities of reviewing existing financial products, expanding them to accommodate housing for IDPs, how we could possibly connect the IDPs to microfinance institutions, because they're the ones closest to the IDPs. We also looked at the possibility of creating an encouraging environment for finance institutions to invest in CSR-related activities, how policies could be formulated to encourage banks and investment institutions to invest in housing for IDPs.
It's great to see governments take on innovative models to solve Africa's challenges. And from innovative models, we move to creative financing solutions. Major financial institutions like the IFC, AFDB, banks across the continent as well, contributed to the conversation on unlocking investments in affected communities. Here is a section of conversations on the importance of financing for private sector development and investment.
Julia, we have seen in Kenya there's been a lot of internal displacement, especially because of natural disasters, drought, floods. Since 2021, there have been large-scale internal displacement. So if you could tell us, what role can your institution play to address the challenges faced by displaced persons who are forced to relocate and require access to banking services?
We get a lot of expert advice from the collaborators that we deal with, and those are people who give us the weather trends and things that are happening, because now we have farmers who are micro farmers, and some of them are in those areas where the IDPs are, and there's food security as well. So what we do once we get the trends and the things that are happening, then we do insurances that are designed to facilitate, should they need to be moved from one area to another, how can we pay them using all the information that we have gathered? And not only that, we also have the partnership that we have with the telcos. What it also does, we actually get to the level where they are able to sometimes even give us transactions of some of the things these people are doing with their phones. So they can actually give us transactions. And with the transactions, then you can see they can be able to access credit in the bank. So we are really combining this with all the stakeholders, the humanitarian. For the humanitarian space, what we do, we say we can give the IDPs things like prepaid cards, but we just have to confirm they do exist. So they can access the prepaid cards, they can go and, they can swipe their cards wherever they are, if they're in places where that is possible, or they can use their mobile phones where you can disburse the funds there, because you will give us, and then we can be able to maybe disburse the funds there, and then they can be able to transact. So there's quite a bit bit that we do. And lastly, on the telcos, another thing that we are doing currently with the telcos, we are trying to do, because we realize there's a lot of interconnectivity is very challenged. So what we are doing with this stuff, there's a big company called Safaricom. So Absa Bank is partnering with them to be able to finance phones to the, the really, the phones that they can be able to afford, because some of the phones they are not able to afford. So when we get them, when they give us the listing, they say we have the phones. If the banks can come in and finance, then we are able to give the connection to the people who don't have it, then we can be able to communicate a lot more with the population. So there's quite a lot that we are doing in that area.
Intervention at several levels. I would say at first is to be able to do a financial inclusion gap assessment with a human-centric approach. What is the need? What is the demand? What is the supply? What do these communities, these IDPs and their host communities need? And that helps make the case, the business case for our partners. You need to be able to do a business case, to be able to argue for potential revenues as well, right? So that's a very important part. And then also that allows us to understand where does the financial service provider stand in terms of its capacity to serve this sector, and can IFC provide some advisory services to help them develop the proper products for this sector. And now I get to maybe the area where my colleague Olivier intervened, is how do you then help these financial service providers, these financial institutions, microfinance, de-risk or mitigate the risk that they perceive, or that they not just perceive, that are real also in this sector, by first of all, there are several products that we can use. We have the guarantees. Perhaps it's a guarantee that makes sense for a particular financial partner. Perhaps they're dealing with portfolio credit deterioration. How do we help them build more capacity to manage that? We've also helped partners issue social bonds, source funding to specifically address or mitigate a social issue. So a social bond. Gender also is very important, and I know we mentioned that earlier this morning. Women are very vulnerable and more vulnerable in these situations. So how do you help financial institutions develop products to help them address the specific needs of that sector? And we do a lot on banking on women. We have a product that's called Banking on Women.
At the Central Bank of Nigeria, the role we play, and then also because we are part of government, and so we coordinate the space in terms of financial inclusion, and we make sure, because we sit at the nexus of the financial services, and we have our footprints all over the economy. And so we play a coordinating role, a facilitating role that brings actors in the economic space, actors in the space together. We recognize that there's a lot of fragmentation that happens in the system, in the ecosystem. And naturally, we know that public services sometimes are inherently very territorial in the way they work. And so we end up sometimes dissipating a lot of energy in duplications and wasting resources in multiple initiatives or schemes that are aimed at the same thing without really synergizing or complementing each other. So the role the central bank takes on is to bring actors together to formulate a common objective, especially around financial inclusion. We began the journey of financial inclusion in 2010 when we made a commitment in Maya, Mexico, to reduce exclusion to 20% by 2020, which inversely means accelerating inclusion by 80%. I would like to say we didn't achieve that objective in 2020, but we did make a significant dent on the incidence of exclusion. We reduced exclusion. We increased inclusion to 64.1% by 2020. And currently, I'm happy to say, based on the surveys that we have carried out together with EFINA, we are at 74.1% inclusion. But then, if you decongest that headline figure down, to the granularities, we are not achieving, we are underperforming across a range of other variables like insurance, pensions, and capital market exposure to the capital market. But in terms of payments, in terms of accounts, credit, in terms of accounts, savings accounts, we are really performing, very well. So I can say that currently our target today is 95% inclusion, by 2028. And we want to be able to materially expand access to finance to adult Nigerians who are qualified to onboard to financial services. But then in our strategy, the IDPs, people who are internally displaced or forcibly displaced, in our strategy, that imperative arose as a result of our prioritization. We prioritize women as highly excluded in our society. We prioritize youth. We also prioritize rural areas, MSMEs, whom we know in Nigeria today, access to credit stands at 5%. And we have 49 million businesses in Nigeria by the last count that EFINA gave to us. We have 49 million businesses, and Nigerians are chronic business people. Everyone does business, both in their backyard, in their veranda, and on their mobile phones. So there's a very vibrant business community in Nigeria. But then access to credit is 5%. Just imagine, that really portends a lot of opportunity for financial services providers. And just imagine what can happen if that space is unlocked. If at the moment we are just at 5%.
With reference to our engagement with the internally displaced persons, we have been privileged to actually empower quite a few thousands of IDPs across the country. And how did we start this relationship? We visited them. We, first of all, did needs assessment. We invested in research. Who are they? Where are they? What do they need? Where are the gaps that we need to block? Because we cannot intervene blindly. That was the first step. And we were glad to discover that not all of them lack identification. Some of them had the national identification number. Some of them had BVN. Because you understand the issues in the north did not mean that some of these people were not economically viable before they were forced to move from their homes. But we also understood that some also did not have BVN. Yes, we established where the gaps were. And what did we do next? We identified viable partners and collaborators to solve for these issues. An example is a partnership we had with Mercy Corps. And with that partnership, we've been able to build the capacity of about 90,000 farmers. And that's to block, thank you so much, it's a good time to clap. And that's to block the skills gap. We also knew we had to partner with the local governments, especially for those that lacked NIN. And the next thing we had to do was to provide bespoke financial services, of course, in line with the regulatory environment. So of course, they couldn't come to the bank, so we took the bank to them. So we got the BVN machines from Lagos. Specifically, I'm talking about our intervention in an IDP camp in Maiduguri. So we took the BVN machine to them and made sure they all had BVN. Bank verification number for those of my audience that are not in Nigeria, to be able to enable them have a bank account. So with your NIN, National Identification Number, and your bank verification number, you can be financially included. And I'm glad to announce that since we started, over 5,000 internally displaced persons today have bank accounts.
The fragility of peace cannot be overstated. Displacement, whether as a refugee or an internally displaced person, can happen to anyone, anywhere. It could happen to you, and it could happen to me. The Africa Roundtable on Private Sector Solutions to Internal Displacement explored risk, data, regulatory issues, and solutions. And it also highlighted a critical issue, identity. This theme was brought alive through art.
I am Isaac, and I am a carpenter.
I am Clement, and I am a trader.
I am Chioma, and I am a student.
This moving performance was written and choreographed by Alfin Zeh, an African playwright living in the diaspora. In a candid conversation, he explores the significance of identity and the power of storytelling for both IDPs and for the continent as a whole.
Do you feel movement to another geographical location changes your identity? Because that's what we're talking about, internally displaced, even within the same country.
Yeah.
Do you assume a different identity elsewhere?
I come with an identity. So moving from, I don't know, from Borno State to Imo State suddenly doesn't change the fact that I'm a theater director, I'm a film director. So I can come into this place and I see opportunities. So it's for you now to say, oh, okay, how can we do this together? It's not, what can I show? Nobody's saying that when you are temporarily out of water, if I have water, I shouldn't offer you water, but that's temporary, that's for the moment. Because after I drink water, I want to be able to say, okay, thank you, so what do we do now? The continent needs to begin to find new ways to tell our own story, right? People need to be re-educated on telling their own stories. People have important stories, but they don't pay attention to them, right? Because they are not educated on how to tell their own stories. So we do not even realize that climate and its changes today is a heavy story. So the person who owns the story, if you don't know how to tell it, somebody else will tell it for you.
Right.
And if somebody else is telling your story, they're not going to tell you well because you are wearing a cloth that is not yours, right? The Igbos, that the external person doesn't know what you're feeling inside, your internal sickness, right? That's so it's important. We need all around 360 degrees education today on the African continent because we have been told for centuries, our stories have been told from outside. So we need a new language, a new way to enter into ourselves and say, okay, this is what is going on.
From Nairobi to Lagos and Lagos to Rabat, events in 3 African cities had one resounding message. Solving forced displacement in Africa will require a multi-stakeholder, holistic, and distinctly African approach. I'll leave you now with the words of an African proverb that tells us, one bracelet alone does not jingle. We need to stand together to make a difference. And so please, join us in our conversations as we look at how to transform Africa. We leave you with a performance from Lagos, and we'll see you next time on State of Africa.
Who are these people? And what are they doing in our land?
They are IDPs, internally displaced persons.
I am Joseph, and I am a cloth maker. Without me, the world would be naked.
And I am Anima, the professor of letters. Without me, the world would be soulless.
I am Danjuma, and I am a farmer. Without me, the world would go hungry.
I am Isaac, and I am a carpenter.
I am Clement, and I am a trader.
I am Chioma, and I am a student.
I am Ikedi. I am an engineer. Yet bridges have become enemies in my land, and irons crumble like sticks. Here I stand, looking for new roads to build, new bridges to new lives. We, engineers, carpenters, farmers, physicians, nurses, we come with carrying our professions. We do not seek for arms, but we seek for lands and lives that we can touch with our life's experiences. We are you, and you are us.